Hi, everybody. I'm Joanne Soliday, one of the pastors, and this is Nick. You know Nick. He's been one of the pastors for a long time, and Nick's sermon this Sunday stirred us to want to stir you a little bit in this group that you're in tonight, or whether it's a daytime group, to be able to look a little bit deeper. So, you know, the name of this sermon series is Kingdom Confusion, and there are a lot of things we've been confused about over time about what we're supposed to do. And we'll remind you before we even start that everything we believe in is not as much about what we're supposed to do as about what's already been done for us. So your relationship with Jesus is the most important thing. But after you've found it, it's most important to be his hands and feet in a lot of situations. And one of those is in something that it's hard for all of us to talk about. Nick and I are going to talk about that a little bit today, and I'm going to ask him to say a word about why it was so important to him in the sermon to identify sacrifice and living in sacrifice. So, Nick, talk to us about that. Why choose it? Why is it important?
Yeah. So, we're going through the Sermon on the Mount, and Pete had talked last week about how, Jesus was the fulfillment of the law and Jesus essentially brought wisdom, connected wisdom back to the law. And then he kind of ended with this, that really love is really what we're called to, and really what we're required to do. And love goes beyond the law, And so as I was reading the next few verses, very popular verses, it just kind of stuck out to me. This sacrifice that we have to have. That love is the sacrifice, and that, of course, that Jesus says that the greatest of love is that we would lay down our life for another, and so Jesus does that. He takes the next few verses and talks about some laws that we kind of feel mean one thing or have meant one thing for a while, but Jesus just kind of wants to take it deeper and wants to show us how really far love will go, and so I've really enjoyed the sermon. I really enjoyed researching the sermon. It was convicting for me, like most of the time that I preach. Anyone preaches, I know, and also that this sacrifice, this sacrificial living, is how God is Jesus is bringing about His kingdom. This is kind of the really the bedrock of what He's talking about, and of course what He demonstrates in His life. And so sacrifice is not easy, and I was thinking about examples, Joanne, about just what does it look like every day in our lives, I just honestly just kept coming back to marriage.
Oh gosh,
right?
Okay.
I feel like marriage and parenting.
It's a great example,
the two
isn't
biggest
it?
things that we can't. That it's so difficult to do without sacrifice. It forces us that way to sacrifice,
Yeah, our love is so strong. We want to do it for our children, and that's a great way to think about it. And it'd be a great way for you guys to talk about it in your groups, too, is that how that's different. Because I see it on a spectrum. There are little sacrifices every day, and then there are kind of the sacrifices that Jesus called us to do that really meant giving up something. Yeah. But he was always so in tune with us growing and growing closer to God that even when we give up something, I think we become better because of it. And I think that's what Jesus didn't ask us to sacrifice so that we could give one more bit of food to the poor. He knew what it would do to our hearts to give one more bit of food to the poor, and so that's why he went there.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really glad you went there, because I think it's a big point of confusion for a lot of people. People believe if they become a Christian, sometimes it means they're stuck. They're restricted. Mm-hmm. And what we're saying is the sacrifice we're asked to give is freeing in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, very much. And then the three examples that he gave, about an eye for an eye and justice, we have to give up our vengeance. So that doesn't feel very good. And that's a sacrifice. We have to, we're releasing someone who's indebted to us by what they've done. and we're releasing them from that. And it feels wrong. It feels like we're letting someone off the hook and justice is not being done. But actually is being done is freedom from my heart, and I'm free from that burden that I carry, the hatred or the vengeance that I want against that other person. And even when it seemingly we think that the scales are balanced, if there's punishment done or it's still off balance, and Jesus knew that, and so the only way for true freedom is to sacrifice that vengeance and give that up. And you mentioned about money too, and that's obviously a big one. Giving without any kind of chance of return to us is huge, and I think it's only in those times that like the money kind of gets broken. Its grip gets broken from around our heart. And it's not, of course, it's not just money. It can be lots of things, but a generous spirit, living like we are citizens of heaven, but residents of earth. That this is not the end.
I loved when that got said. That was a perfect thing. The other thing that I think about that you all can talk about too is you're not going to know where Jesus might want you to sacrifice if you stay isolated. We can stay protected in our bubbles, and that's got to be a big piece of this for us, where we put ourselves in the middle of the people who are different than we are sometimes, so that we understand what they don't have that we have and how we can be helpful. But if we stay in our Christian huddle, if we stay in our little groups and we don't step outside of them into some of the pain, we'll not know where to sacrifice. It's easy in families. It's right there in front of us. But he wanted us to go beyond families. He wanted to go to his family, our congregation, our flock, our town, our community. But sometimes we protect ourselves from that, don't you think?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And he says, that second verse, it talks about loving your enemy. And he says, love your neighbor. You've heard it said, love your neighbor. And to me, that felt like, that, loving your neighbor is not easy. Sometimes your neighbor can be difficult to love or whatever, but it's still people that are close to you. It's still people that that there's a community that kind of thinks like you do, or at least of some sort. And so it's like you get that benefit of community, I guess. But really loving sacrificially would be loving your enemy.
Yeah. When
in fact, loving your enemy could look like even a detriment to you.
Could look like it would hurt you.
Absolutely,
it could, and
absolutely. And it possibly could. But I think Jesus is saying that, but that sacrifice, there's so much that I think we can learn. That we don't. We put up walls between the us and the them, and then I think we lose some community and some learning about ourselves and about, I guess, about love because of that. We don't learn from each other, I guess, and I guess enemies is an easy way to do that. We just kind of separate ourselves into compartments, but
well, and I think in these next couple months, people sort of become our enemies when we didn't think they would, just because they believe differently than we do about a candidate or a political theory or whatever. And it's a perfect time for us to be looking at kingdom confusion and sacrifice. Somebody said to me the other day, don't you want me to say exactly how I feel? And I said, no. I don't. I would rather you didn't do that, because you're going to stimulate a spark that isn't going to go anywhere in here. I would rather you say exactly how you feel about your relationship with Jesus, or about how you're going to act during this time in front of other people, rather than to try to make a point to me that I ought to believe like you ought to believe. So that's a sacrifice too, sometimes, to be quiet.
Oh, yes.
It's a sacrifice sometimes to be quiet. So it's a great topic, and I'm so glad you chose it and chose to look at it in such a comprehensive way for us. So I appreciate that. And for you guys there in your group, as you turn off the podcast and start to discuss this, it might be interesting for you to talk about some of the times that were true sacrifice in your lives, rather than the small ones we make every day. And Nick's point about how the family module is the way to look at that. The strength you feel around sacrificing there is the strength we need to feel around the kingdom.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Go for it. Thank you.